Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Distinguished speakers and guest participants and the organizers of the international seminar on Usuluddin Studies 2025. My name is Lukman bin Johani. I am from Raja Zarif Sofia Center for Advanced Studies on Islam, Science and Civilization, University Technology Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. My presentation today entitled A Shift in Islamic Ontology, Preliminary Analysis on Kunawi Tusi's Correspondence. Some background to my study which I want to present today concerning the ontology in Islam. It is in fact the study of wujud, and the word wujud has much more to convey than in the very word of onto in Greek, and cannot be limited to just only to the ontology in the modern sense. The wujud in Islam, not only ontological in nature, it also encompasses the epistemological, psychological, and cosmological aspect. In this case, if you observe properly in the history of the Islamic tradition, whether it is intellectual or spiritual, you will observe that the question of wujud in Islamic thought occupies the most central position in the metaphysics of Islam. The nature of the discussion of wujud in Islam is distinct as a result of the triangulation of ideas from the philosophers, the hukama, or sometimes they were called as the falasifa, the theologians or ahlul kalam, and the metaphysician, which is the Sufiya. However, this is the problem statement for my study. So far, no analytical study has been specifically made to understand the early formation of the direct engagement on the question of wujud, despite its importance and significance. Therefore, what I trying to emphasize here, during the significant period of transition of the discourse, as exemplified in the correspondence between Al-Kunawi or Sadruddin Kunawi and Nasiruddin At-Tusi, I did not found any analytical study which has been specifically made to understand the early formation of this discussion on wujud. Therefore, it brings me to the objective of my study, which is to examine the ontological question of wujud in the correspondence between these two Muslim thinkers, these two great Muslim thinkers which live in the same period and also pass away in the same year. The Sadruddin Kunawi is the one who representing Ibn Arabi school, the school of Ibn Arabi, and the other, Nasiruddin Tusi, is a representative and also a reviver of Ibn Sina school. And they exemplified their correspondence in one of the texts published as Al-Murasalat Baina Sadruddin Al-Kunawi wa Nasiruddin At-Tusi. So my methodology for this study, I classify it into three methodologies. The first methodology is the historical survey on the intellectual milieu of their times, which I try to analyze from the historical perspective their background, the Al-Kunawi and At-Tusi. The second methodology is selective textual analysis on Al-Kunawi and At-Tusi's writing, and thirdly, comparative analysis on their thoughts on wujud. The main text analyzed here is, which I have mentioned earlier, the Murasalat Baina Sadruddin Al-Kunawi wa Nasiruddin Tusi, or in English, the correspondence between Sadruddin Al-Kunawi and Nasiruddin Tusi, a text which was established and first published in 1995, based on different manuscripts collected and edited by Gudrun Schubert. meaning in Arabic we call it the tahqiq, the addition, the critical addition of the murasalat. The analysis towards the main text is by way of selective commentary of the text, but focus only certain central theme discussed between Al-Qunawi and At-Tusi, considering the nature of their correspondence, which is like a two-way conversation between two great thinkers. The fact that they correspond on written letters is actually a very interesting things that we can see in our history, and they did not even have the time to meet each other. So this is the examples of the text that I am analyzing previously and also in the present times. The basic structure of correspondence is basically the first treatise risalah, the first risalah written by Sadruddin Kunawi, which is the questions posed to the Nasiruddin At-Tusi, and then Nasiruddin At-Tusi reply the questions, and this risalah is called the Ajwibah, and then the answers by Nasiruddin At-Tusi was again given the final conclusion by Sadruddin Kunawi, and this is called as Ar-Risalah Al-Hadiyah. For the first finding that I find in this study is that I found that the correspondence is the first exchange that ever occurred in the history of Islam between two representatives of school of thought of Sufi, the metaphysician, and philosopher, which had long-lasting impact in the later times, meaning the intellectual tradition of kalam, of tasawwuf, and also of the philosophy. Therefore, their discussion on the problem of wujud marks the nature of Islamic ontology of the 13th century. The second finding is that relating to the first and major question in the correspondence, which is the question given by Al-Qunawi to At-Tusi in the first risalah written by him. Al-Qunawi asks, do you accept that the being wujud of the necessary wajibul wujud is additional zaid to its reality haqiqah, or do you hold that its being is identical with its quality mahiyah and that it possesses no reality beyond being? This is the issue that has been raised by Al-Qunawi concerning the problematic issue on the relation between al-wujud or the existence with the mahiyah or the quality. The third finding, referring to the previous question by Al-Qunawi, we saw that it is an attempt to provide the solution to the issue that has been ongoing for decades concerning the relation between existence and quality, whether the existence is additional to quality or the quality is additional to it, vice versa. This is referring to Al-Qunawi's question to At-Tusi previously. The fourth finding, we can see that the turning point, which I mentioned earlier in my title, a shift in Islamic ontology, that I observe is that it is evident by way of gradual transition from the confined discussion on the concept of existence, the mafhum al-wujud, to a much more wider horizon of the reality of existence, the haqiqatul wujud, and the superiority of the Sufi, the metaphysician's exposition of wujud over the philosopher. The representative of the Sufi here is the Sadruddin Kunawi, and the philosopher is Nasiruddin At-Tusi. So, some discussions that we can derive from this brief, at least preliminary analysis, is that the discussion on the nature of wujud based on the distinction between the essence and existence, wujud and mahiyah, was raised in many occasions during the correspondence, which somehow proved the ongoing debates which happened during that time between a representative from the school of Ibn Sina and a Sufi from the school of Ibn Arabi. From the preliminary analysis on Kunawi Tusi's correspondent, the Murasalat, the transition is clearly taking place. And one of the best ways to ascertain and prove it, this transition, is by way of tracing both the historical background and the historical context related specifically to the ontological discussion in Islamic thought. Over times, the new contexts were properly identified and considered. Finally, we came to our last conclusions that we can observe the importance or the significance of this ontological discussion is that we can say that the same way also in our contemporary times in the era of artificial intelligence, which will perhaps be considered from the aspect of its reality, whether its existence is something real or how much real it can be. This is concerning the reality or the realness of something that we see, that we hear, that we perceive in our everyday life. If it is real, how can we human being be able to benefit from that? And these are some of the questions which need to be asked repeatedly so that somehow it will shape our intellect through things for its philosophy, the meaning behind it. As you can see, this ontological discussion in Islamic tradition also important within the context of the modern secular philosophy of science, which almost neglecting or dismissing this idea of ontology or this idea of metaphysics in their discussion. So therefore, this is what is missing in the current context of the modern philosophy of science. Therefore, what we are doing, what we are trying to introduce here is something that can fill the gap, fill the missing thing in the discussion or in the discourse of the modern secular philosophy of science. I think that is all from me. Thank you for listening to me, and wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.